Hi, I'm Jennifer Andres, Director of Consumer Protection for the Erie County Department of Public Advocacy. We are conducting another interview in our Ask the Expert series. Today, we are interviewing Jessica Copeland, who is the chair of the Cybersecurity and Data Privacy Practice Group and the chair of the newly formed AI Practice Group with Schoeneck King attorneys here in downtown Buffalo. Thank you for taking the time to discuss consumer protection with us. As we continue this series, we know how valuable these discussions are and know that you make an important contribution to consumer protection on a daily basis with what you do.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Can you give us a quick overview of the work you do and how it applies to consumer protection?
Sure. So my practice areas include data privacy and cybersecurity, as well as AI governance. And what that really means and how there's a downstream impact for consumers is that we provide guidance, legal counsel to companies and municipalities, universities, basically any organization. And the way that is a downstream impact on consumers is that it helps organizations understand what they need to do to protect the information that their constituents, their customers, their employees are providing them in order to obtain services or purchase goods.
Okay. Well, one of the things you mentioned in cybersecurity is data breaches, which is what I'd like to talk about today. So how is a consumer protected from a data breach in New York State?
So in New York State, there is a law called the New York Shield Act, and that actually governs any organization, whether there is brick and mortar in New York State or outside of New York State, but handling New York resident electronic data. They not only are obligated to notify impacted individuals if there's a data breach, but there's a part of the law that is referred to as the cybersecurity mandate, and that actually delineates the steps that organizations need to take to deploy technical, administrative, and physical safeguards surrounding the information provided by consumers.
Okay. Well, that's great to know that there's requirements for businesses and some protections for consumers, but we know that that doesn't stop a breach from happening. So how can a consumer protect themselves from a data breach?
So it's impossible to completely protect yourself 100% from a data breach. And I'm sure most listeners have in the past, maybe even recently, received a notice of security breach letter from some entity. What I recommend in terms of protecting your credit card, your bank account information is at the primary level, if you're not looking to obtain a line of credit for anything. If you are in a home and you have motor vehicles and you don't need to purchase any equipment or motor vehicles or obtain a lease for an apartment, then you really should probably freeze your credit, because the only reason you leave it open is if you need to open another line of credit. And if it's open to you, then it is open to a fraudster. So if you're not using your credit, there's no reason to keep it open, and you can just freeze it, and it's a free service that you can obtain. But if you have to keep it open, because many of us do, then the other things that you need to consider are constantly monitoring your online accounts, just in case there's some activity that looks different. It's a retailer that you've never shopped at and you see a charge on it. It could be as minimal as $10, but that could be a start of a compromise to your account. In terms of other online account best practices, you should always use strong passwords. We're recommending now 12 to 16 characters. You can have alphanumeric. There's actually a recommendation to maintain passphrases. The longer it is, the harder it is to crack. You should rotate your passwords. I know it's really frustrating because you go to log into an account that you want to shop on and you can't remember the password, and then you have to press forget password, and it's a vicious cycle. But it really is protecting your account from compromise. And then the last piece that we recommend is, when you have the opportunity, apply multi-factor authentication if that's an option with the account. So some online accounts will allow you to select and enable multi-factor authentication, which provides you a prompt after you log in with your username and password to confirm that it's actually you.
Unfortunately, I agree. I think that no matter how many protections a consumer can try to make and continue to do on a daily basis, they're still open to a data breach. So
There's one other thing, sorry to interrupt you,
Oh, yeah.
Jennifer, that I try to remember as well for my personal use and friends and family that ask me, frankly, is if you cannot store your credit card on your shopping websites, that is another layer of protection because obviously, it is annoying to have to enter your credit card information every time you make a purchase. But if it's not stored in your account, even if your account is compromised, the threat actor or the fraudster cannot do anything because there's no credit card to actually charge. So that's another layer of online consumer protection. And I think at one point I had mentioned to you previously the brick and mortar protections that consumers can employ is if you have the option when you pay with credit card at the point of sale to use the tap function instead of the card swipe function, there's been an uptick in the skimming devices that are applied to some of those point of sales. And so that's another recommendation.
Okay. If a consumer is affected by a data breach, what action should they take to not only address the data breach or make sure that their data is safe after a breach?
Sure. So if you're notified of a breach, there are pretty typical standard letters that provide details on the categories of information that were compromised, and then steps that you can take to, as I mentioned, freeze your credit or sign up for credit monitoring and identity theft protection. I've found that often there's a very low percentage of individuals that actually sign up for that credit monitoring or identity theft protection, and I think that's a really easy way of mitigating your risk of compromise. And then the other piece of it, as I mentioned, you'll see the categories of information compromised because that's a requirement under the New York Shield Act and many other state breach notification laws to actually specify, was it just your name and address? Was it your name, address, date of birth, social security number, anything in between? And that'll help you know what information you need to be more mindful of going forward and protecting.
Okay, I think that those are really good recommendations for a consumer to not only protect their data before a breach happens, but also make sure that they address a breach when they're notified of it. If you were a consumer and the only part of this interview that you saw was right at the end, are there any other tips that you would give somebody?
To maintain vigilance and skepticism, I hate to say skepticism because we don't all want to walk around the consumer world and think that someone's out to get you. And that's not the case, but just be mindful of the risks that are out there. So if you do have a habit of online shopping, which I like to shop online pretty frequently, just use best practices and have that long passphrase that you don't repeat in every online account because that makes it more susceptible to compromise, and enable that multi-factor authentication. The other piece of it, and it's maybe a preview for another conversation, is to be mindful of most recent scams, which are employing AI technology to create voices that sound like somebody that is credible. And so just, if you're getting phone calls from somebody that's professing to be, a local government official and asking you for sensitive information, or maybe it's someone from the tax department asking you for sensitive information because we just ended tax season, don't provide anyone your social security number or bank account information over the phone.
Well, we do know that imposter scams can take many forms, so that is good advice. So as a consumer, make sure that you are not only limiting the amount of information that you're providing to people, whether that's online or out in the community, but also make sure that you are monitoring your accounts, checking your credit reports to identify if you have been a victim of identity theft or fraud, or data that may have been involved in a data breach is being used maliciously against you. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time to discuss consumer protection, and we appreciate your insight and your knowledge.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for inviting me today.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful.
You're welcome. And if you do have any other questions or are looking for more information, please visit our website. It's erie.gov/consumer protection. Thank you.